Hey people, it's late now, it's about 1 AM. I want to speak a bit about, as a boxing fan here, a bit about the Froch-Groves 2 fight. This actually already has a record as, I can't think of any other fight that compares, as the most watched boxing match in British history. I'll repeat that, the most watched boxing match in British history. That's how significant this bout was. It took place at Wembley, which is a famous London football stadium. Well, stadium, it's used for multiple purposes. But 80,000 people turned up for this, according to the reports, well over 80,000. That's like a FA Cup final. It's a huge number of people for a boxing match at any era, in any era. This is the sort of figures you would have seen in the 20s and 30s, when in many ways boxing was at its golden age, arguably. And I think it does send out a message to those who say that MMA has totally taken boxing over, especially in the UK context, because that shows there's clearly a huge interest in the sport. In this video, just want to speak a little bit about some of the issues around the fight. I can't comment too much about the fight itself because I didn't see it. I didn't actually manage to see the fight. I don't have pay-per-view, so unfortunately I can't see these things at the time. To give you a bit of background, for those of you who may be sort of passive boxing fans or don't even follow the sport, Carl Froch and George Groves are two prominent British boxers. Froch is the highest ranked current British fighter, pound for pound, and he's ranked by Ring magazine as the number 10 pound for pound fighter in the world. That means he's one of the best boxers on the planet. And I think justifiably so. I think he is, he's certainly not the greatest British boxer ever, but I think he's a fair claim to being pretty high up. Definitely, unquestionably in the top 20 British boxers of all time. Look at his resume, he's got a lot of things to be proud of. I mean, he won the super middleweight title defeating Lucien Boutte, that's the IBF super middleweight title. May 2013. He became the WBA Unified Champion after defeating Mikhail Kessler. Now, with this young man, with George Groves, there's been a lot of aggro, and even in boxing terms, you know, most boxing matches, high-profile boxing matches, have a lot of sort of mudslinging both ways, and it's a bit of a pantomime. But with these guys, it's been pretty intense. In fact, I can't remember anything like this in British boxing since the days of Nigel Benn and Chris Eubank. So it's sort of like, I want to show you a few magazines. This is the coverage for the first fight in November last year, November 2013. That's from Boxing Monthly. This is for the first fight. British beef, that gives you an idea. Sort of beef is slang for bad blood between two people. In the first fight, it was very controversial because the referee, Hard Foster, ended it a bit earlier than most people would have liked. Froch won that, but it was a very controversial decision. Many people believed that Groves could have went on. Froch defended the referee. What he said was, well, I could have had George Groves in serious trouble there, and I don't want to... his logic was basically, I don't want to paralyse this man for life, or worse. The referee... You know, I think boxing referees, it must be one of the toughest jobs, because you can never win. Whatever choice you make, very often the fans won't favour it. Because they've paid good money, as Carl Froch says. They want to see a fight, and for a world title fight like that, world title? Sorry, just I may be misquoting that. Was it a world title? The IBF installed George Groves as Froch's mandatory challenger, so yeah, it was a title fight. Many people believe that because it was a title fight, it was stopped a little bit early. Although, you know, it went into the 9th round, it's not like it was stopped in the 2nd or 3rd round. But many people were saying that, that was in Manchester, by the way, many people were saying the fight could have went on, and that the referee robbed Groves of a possible victory. The truth is, we'll never know. But you know, I do think that people need to be aware of the pressure that a referee is under. Basically, they have a choice in their hands of A, allowing a fighter to continue, and possibly taking the opportunity to get a world title, or basically having a man's life in your hands and no one will thank you for it, but basically saving his life by stopping the fight. The fighter will never thank you, his corner will never thank you, and the fans will never thank you. So I do believe that a referee's job is a very tough one. Froch got a lot of slack after that. He was booed as he left the arena. A lot of people believed he didn't deserve to win the fight. This has been a very partisan fight in the sense that both sides of supporters have been pretty vocal. So a rematch was absolutely inevitable from that. From Groves' point of view, he described Froch as arrogant in his sort of attitude. I think Froch is incredibly... My own impression of Carl Froch is he's a very skilled fighter, he's a very clever fighter. He's a very clever man, actually. I think as... he's not a typical boxer in the sense he just doesn't mouth off. He's actually a very clever guy. That's the impression I get. And he's incredibly skilled, incredibly hard. Groves is a very able challenger. I do give Groves respect. I think he's went almost the distance with Froch twice, so you can't ridicule a man who's went twice with a world challenger. Froch himself said that for this young guy, a lot of it was a bit of a front because he is trying to prove something. He's a young fighter. I'm not sure exactly what age Groves is, 25, something like that. And don't quote me on that, I don't know exactly, but Froch on the other hand is 36, so there's a significant age difference between them. George Groves, I was going to say there's a north-south thing, but it isn't quite that case because Froch is from Nottingham, a Midland city. Groves is from Hammersmith, London. 26, so there's a full 10 years between them. George Groves is 26, so he has more to prove in that sense. Froch is already a pound for pound world titleist. Groves calls Froch arrogant. I actually think a lot of what Froch has said is quite sportsmanlike in the sense that he shows compassion and he shows a sort of lack of sadism that other fighters have. In the sport, it's a brutal sport and everyone who follows boxing knows that. But I think the fan base also has to remember that these are not actual gladiators. This is not ancient Rome, and we're not talking about men who are going to throw javelins at each other and that sort of thing. Any real boxing fan, regardless of how much they want a certain fighter to win, would not honestly want him to do serious damage to his opponent, i.e. to wreck a man's life by paralysing him or something like that. And if you do, you're not a real boxing fan as far as I'm concerned, because you're talking about 50, 100 pound ticket versus a man's life. It's just, there's no comparison. And I must admit, even as a boxing fan, the sheer intensity that was building up before this fight was a little bit unsettling, because it meant that there was enormous pressure on both guys. And please Froch won. I mean, I think it definitely gives closure to the controversy around the last fight, so absolutely no one could question Carl Froch now. Of course he had to take the rematch. It would have looked pretty bad if he didn't. What I think for Froch's next move, what I think would be great, is if he could have a rematch with Andre Ward. Andre Ward is number 2 ranked boxer on the planet, and he's the only man to date that has beaten Froch, and Froch hasn't avenged that. I mean, Froch was beaten by Kessler, but Froch avenged that in the rematch. So I think Froch should do a Lennox Lewis and avenge his only other loss, which is to Andre Ward. And in my opinion, that would make Froch one of the greatest modern British fighters. I still don't think he'd be quite as great as Joe Calzaghe, who they've had a bit of... but basically, that's it. Oh, by the way, this is the coverage of the second bout, tonight's fight. Pressure cooker. The third man, that's actually referring to James DeGale, who's another rated British fighter, who presumably now is going to fight Froch. His positioning, boxing politics, was to fight the winner of this bout. full respect to both men. I think, like I say, this is a brutal sport, and one of the most brutal things about it is not the violence, but it's the sort of mob mentality of fans sometimes. Like, the way some fans talk is like they would literally like their man to kill the opponent, and to me that's just, you know, I follow the sport because I love the adrenaline of it. I love the opportunities that are presented by it. I love the anthropology of it. I love a lot of things about boxing, but one thing I don't like is sometimes the fan mentality. Any man who steps between those ropes deserves fundamental respect, and of course there's a lot of mouthing off, there's a lot of, especially in a big fight like this. But another point is it was a big night for Eddie Hearn, the promoter. I mean, there's been quite a lot of coverage about him actually as a promoter, which isn't always the case. You know, quite often all the focus is on the fighters, but on this occasion there's also quite a lot of focus on him as a promoter. I mean, what he has done is got a boxing match that has had 80,000. I can't even begin to comprehend that. I mean, I look forward to watching this fight on YouTube, because that's the only way I can watch boxing matches, because I don't have pay-per-view. Anyway, Froch-Groves 2, I think it's a good outcome. Froch has managed to have closure on the first fight. Groves fought valiantly. He's a brave young man, and I believe he can go far. He should learn something from this, and everything I've seen, even Froch fans have commended him for being taking it like a man, and, you know, not sort of whinging about it, which he did a bit in the first fight, in my opinion. But yeah, full respect to both men. I mean, you cannot disrespect fighters who put on a battle before 80,000 people. That's the closest thing we basically have to modern day gladiators, and you cannot disrespect someone who voluntarily puts himself in that position. It's, you know, those sort of numbers haven't been seen since the days of Jack Dempsey. I mean, that's phenomenal. Even in the 70s, you know, most Ali fights didn't see those sort of numbers. And that's not a statement on the ability of the boxers, but it's just showing the interest involved. So, phenomenal. And it is particularly significant in this country, of all countries, because Britain has a unique sentiment with boxing, in that the modern sport began here. Modern, I mean outside the classical world. Began with Jack Broughton in 1741, through to the Marquess of Queensberry rules in 1867, I believe, and sort of evolved through them. But basically, Britain is the birthplace of modern boxing. So no one can ever disrespect this country's role in the sport in terms of its sentimental connection. So I'll leave it there. Congratulations to Carl Froch. I hope George Groves is okay. I hope he's not, like, you know, in boxing we often think about the physical damage, but I believe another very important aspect is the psychological side, and I hope he can sort of pull himself together and realise it's not the end of the world. And he's still a brave young man. He's still stepped between the ropes, and just, I hope he can be okay with it. Froch probably doesn't have a huge number of fights left. I think he'll always be ranked as a pretty damn good British fighter. Not our best, certainly not our best, but I would say maybe a claim to be within the top 10. Okay, thanks for watching.